Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 117. I am the Angry Raccoon, your only host for this podcast, and it was almost going to be no one hosting this podcast given how crazy and exciting and off-the-wall things were over the last fortnight, mainly for me. Now, I want to start off this podcast with a quick story I got to tell you guys. Basically what happened, as this country has been experiencing a lot of very mixed weather, so we're going from hot weather to rainy days, just one day after the other. Now, one day I basically get what I think or believe is a mosquito bite kind of on one of my toes, and so I don't really want to cause any issues, knowing how messy and how itchy mosquito bites can be. I basically leave it. Now, we cut to, let's say I think it was about 3 days later, and this spot is now turning into a blister, which seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the hour. Now, things got so bad that it was getting to the point where it was really hard to work, really hard to walk, so I basically, was going from doctor to pharmacist to eventually hospital to essentially get it drained and removed. Now, this has been pretty distracting for the most part, as I've had a lot of things to do over the last few weeks, and just having constant pain has not been fun, and especially not really being able to walk for the most part. And really funny, and I guess this is partly more of a mention, ever since I essentially got the blister or whatever it is essentially drained and I got the skin cut off, which wasn't a very pleasant experience. It didn't hurt though, but it wasn't very pleasant. Ever since I've taken off the dressing, it's kind of looked like I've been bitten by a shark, because I have no skin on most of my toe. So if for whatever reason I sound like I'm in pain for some reason, that's probably why. And I should mention as well, I'm recording, as you might be able to tell, in a different place than I usually do. That's because where we usually record is way too noisy, and I didn't want to have a, let's say, constant noise that is very new and distracting constantly going out for this podcast. So I'm sorry if this podcast does actually in return sound very strange, or if there is too much noise going on in the background. But it's been a pretty busy week for the most part. Not only almost losing my toe, but I also managed to watch and do a ton of things for the most part. A lot of shows, mainly dark stuff, and I've noticed, actually writing up this podcast and kind of putting it together, this is a pretty dark podcast given some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, and especially for those of you who've already checked the description and looked in the download link, you'll see everything's kind of dark for the most part. Not everything, but most things. So let's kick it up with the first thing I watched, and the first thing I watched was a 2000 series called Jam, just simply called Jam, by Chris Morris. And this is probably by far one of the darkest and more disturbing, comedies I've ever watched. It's very surreal, it's very dreamlike, very nightmarish, very postmodern, very nonsensical, and very dark for the most part. And it doesn't really have too much of a rhyme or reason. It's very hard to essentially talk about it other than saying it's a very dark, sketch comedy. And I can tell you right now, this is going to be a show that is not for everyone. When I say the subject matter is dark, it is very dark. There are topics and ideas that will make you feel very uncomfortable, and there are things that will, really upset and really, get certain people. I'm trying to think of the word. It's not really triggered. They'll just, reason for complaint. There's tons of people are going to complain about this show and all that. So if you're easily offended, that's the word. If you're easily offended, stay away from the shows. I'm not even trying to egg you on or challenge you. Don't even bother with this if you're one of those kinds of people who just loves to complain about this and that, how every single person is a terrible person. You're not going to like it because it's dark. This show does not shy away from dark matters, especially stuff that is very controversial in a more well-known sense. And a lot of the sketches they can go either two ways. They could either be so ridiculous that they're funny, or so disturbing that they're uncomfortable, but yet some may find it funny to some extent. And I'll give you an example of a few of those. So there's one such sketch where it kind of, well, I should mention as well, this series has a very interesting soundtrack where it essentially takes trip hop and ambient and minimalistic songs and kind of uses it as the backdrop for what's being shown. And a lot of the visuals are very obscure. They're kind of almost found footage sometimes. The aspect ratio is always constantly changing. Sometimes we have shots kind of taken from like a CCTV camera or other forms of like obscuring the vision to kind of make it seem as if it's like being recorded from a secondhand perspective, which I really loved. And two sections I want to talk about to kind of give you a rough example of the kind of show this is. And this is kind of more in the dreamlike, surrealist, nonsensical-esque one, where one of the sketches revolves around a guy who has just for whatever reason decided he now wants to live in the wild. And now how this scene plays out is you have very kind of almost as if a documentary crew is filming him, shots of him just kind of standing out in this almost countryside like place, next to shots of him with his wife, kind of talking about how he simply cannot return back to the house. He feels like it'll be wrong for him to do that, but yet he's often saying how it'd be so easy for him to just go in the house, have a bath, have a plate of eggs and just be happy with it, but he can't. Something is like stopping him. And the way it's done, it definitely is done in a very odd way. And there's another example which is slightly more in the comedic sense, where a man walks into a shop, holds the the guy at the counter, up with a gun and basically says, pack of cigarettes. The guy gives him the cigarettes, to which the guy with the gun gives him £5, to which the guy behind the counter says, do you want change? And he says, of course I want change. What do you think the gun is for? He takes the change and the guy at the counter basically says, you don't need to pay. And the guy's like, well, give me my money back then. He gives him the £5 back and he tries to give the guy the change and he's like, no, you don't need to give me the change. And he basically alludes to the fact that you have a gun. And so the robber kind of looks at the gun kind of gleefully and kind of comes to some kind of realization. He walks out of the shop, on the streets of London, looking at the gun. I guess he robs another store and then gets caught by the police. As he's sitting in the police car, he's essentially happy, almost like freed, and he kind of just looks at this pack of cigarettes, it's hard to explain, it's hard to describe, but I guess if you're that interested, give it a watch. I would highly recommend it. But like I said, if you're easily offended, do not watch it, because it's very dark and very disturbing. Next show I want to talk about, still being dark, I probably should have started with this one, is I watched all of Black Mirror Season 5, and I thought it was good. Solid season. I thought the first episode was definitely the weaker of the three. It definitely had a lot of scenes that definitely kind of went nowhere and meandered for way too long. I honestly thought you could have cut about 10 minutes and the point of the episode kind of was established within the halfway mark, and they kind of didn't really know how to escalate, plot points or do anything with it. It kind of came to a weird standstill, which is very odd. The second episode I thought was by far the best episode. It definitely dealt with a very real and interesting issue. It definitely felt like something that could have happened and probably has happened, based on a very simple and upsetting premise. I'm not going into spoilers because I don't want to spoil it. It's still very new. It came out at the time of this recording, like maybe less than 3 weeks ago. But the pacing of it, the tension of it, everything this episode stood for and what it did worked perfectly. It felt real and it felt scary. The third episode, I'm very hit or miss with this one, mainly because I liked a lot of the ideas behind it, because it definitely does focus or puts its focus more on another medium and another industry, which I really did like that approach. But towards the end, it kind of had a bit of an identity crisis and didn't know what it wanted to be. Not to spoil anything, it almost felt as if it went from a slasher horror film to a children's animated film. The shift was that jarring, and I get what they were trying to do, but it didn't really work for the most part. But there were some great ideas and there's some great points it makes. But overall, season 5 is a pretty good season. I still haven't watched Bandersnatch because it's too long, simply put. Next thing I want to talk about is a animated anthology stop motion series, which I found out about literally from typing in the words, "Why is love, death, and robots so garbage?" To which Google search said, hey, here's a good animated anthology series called The Shivering Truth. Now, much like Jam, which I've just talked about, The Shivering Truth is even more nonsensical and very disgusting and very disturbing. It's essentially a very, very twisted parody of the Twilight Zone and anthology series in itself. This series is nonsensical and it's brilliant for the most part. It's a shame there hasn't been any more episodes of it, but I don't want to talk about too much because there's very little I can actually talk about without possibly disgusting people or ruining it. But the series moves at a blistering pace. It is quite incredible how fast the series moves, and each episode is no more than 12 minutes long, but yet it still seems to focus on one kind of idea. The best example episode, or the simplest episode to explain, is the 4th episode, which essentially revolves around a 911 phone call, and the escalation and the tension and the sheer... It's hard to explain what exactly is even going on because it just takes so many twists and is just so all over the place. And the narrator is definitely doing his most hammy kind of Twilight Zone impression, because he's kind of essentially talking about very ridiculous subject matters like this, and he's definitely moving at quite a fast pace in order to deliver these nonsensical lines which come out as being very I can't really do the voice, but it's kind of like that. I would say watch the trailer before going into the show, and if you actually liked Love, Death and Robots, watch this because it is by far way better than that. It's actually a pretty good show. And the last thing I want to talk about to kind of bring things back to a slightly more positive light is I managed to watch all of the Peter Serafinowicz. I can't even say his name. See, I practice as well. It's the Peter Serafinowicz show. The Peter Serafinowicz show. Now, Peter Serafinowicz is, I guess, kind of a very famous talent because this guy is in Star Wars. He's also in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's kind of been in roughly everything. And this is his comedy show where he's essentially doing impersonations and parodies of all kinds of things, from advertisements to guides to life to those kind of documentary interviews they did with actors for actors. He kind of parodies and does everything, and this guy has such range and such talent, and his voices and his performances are spot on. Like, the guy definitely looks very distinct, but a lot of the time you won't even know it's him just because you get so lost in the performance. And you know, I must give a massive props to the costume design, the makeup design, for just making him look like these people. And I would highly recommend this show. I think it is, I'm surprised I haven't watched it sooner. It is by far probably one of the best comedies of the last decade. So just type in the Peter Serafinowicz show and just like watch clips. I think people have illegally uploaded the episodes onto YouTube, but I would highly recommend buying the DVD. Fantastic show. Please watch this one. By far one of the better comedies, like I said earlier. Alright, boy, I talked for a while, but then again, I had a lot of things to do. I didn't even mention things like the fact that I've been buying artwork, and, you know, I've been planning other things, and, you know, other discussions for this podcast, but we'll talk about that later. The first thing I want to talk about, and that's going to be the first trailer, is going to be Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I have been looking forward to this film for a really long time, especially soon as Guillermo del Toro is attached to it. I believe he is producing. He's not directing, it's another director. I can't remember his name right now, but you'll see his name in the trailer because he's somewhat of a big name. And yes, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is based on the infamous books from the 90s, originally meant to be horror stories kind of aimed at children, but they essentially became a massive controversial. They became a controversial topic because of the really creepy and unsettling illustrations found in all three books, which the illustrations were done, just so you know, by a Stephen Gallmill. I'm not sure how you say his name. It's Gammell. Yes, and that's kind of what put these books on the map. And this is the trailer for it. And although this film is kind of meant to be like a soft horror, kind of like scary-ish film, it actually looks really fun in a very enjoyable and kind of upbeat kind of manner for the most part. That's the way I see it. It's very simple and feels intentionally gimmick and kind of dated to some extent. It does kind of reminisce of a very, like, like a child's first horror film, something like The House with a Clock in Its Wall or the Goosebumps films. It kind of feels like that, but, actually trying to scare children and give them nightmares. Although I have seen the Goosebumps film, and there was a few scenes where I was like, oh, I'm not sure if children will like that. But it is intriguing. And I mean, for example, you have like the haunted house, which you see in the trailer that the kids go to. You have a child main cast, although I'm pretty sure most of the cast aren't children. They might, I think the youngest is probably like 19. You have the linchpin item, which essentially unleashes the monsters, and you have the authorities, not believing the kids, which I'm guessing is who this cop character is. He kind of seems like you kids, you trying to pull a prank on me? It's Halloween, that kind of stuff. So it does feel like a very classic film, and maybe they're kind of going on the sense that this is a book series based in the 80s. You're basing it on material from 30 years ago, so that might be the intention, but it looks like it's gonna be pretty well crafted. I mean, for example, the monsters are actually costumes and practical effects, except for the one monster they show at the end, which I was like, whatever, but yeah, this pretty much pleases me because I they kind of look as if they are trying to be as close to the original illustrations in the book as possible. I don't know whether they're going to follow the same story. I don't know about that. But obviously you have the scarecrow and the really weird woman with the messed up face. And I don't want to ruin some of the other ones which they don't show, obviously. But yeah, it's pretty accurate actually. And I'm really pleased about that. I'm definitely really interested in this film for the most part because one of the main things I want to know with this book is how it works. Like, does it write people's names into the book randomly just to kill them? Or does it figure out your fears and then send something or make something up or send something specific within the book to basically scare you and haunt you? That's something I'm be really interested to see, the rhyme or reason with this book. But yeah, for what it is, and I guess it's getting a bit of hype because, you got nostalgia playing in there, and obviously a lot of people know of the illustrations in the book, so a lot of people are quite hyped for it. I'm interested for it. I hope we actually get a UK release, and I'm hoping it's good, honestly. Yeah, that's all I have to really say about that trailer. There isn't too much to say for the most part, other than, oh, it looks scary, as any YouTuber with a reaction channel has already said. Next trailer I want to talk about is something I don't think a lot of people have actually we're actually talking about for the most part, mainly because it's so obscure and for the most part looks really dumb, and that's the Banana Splits movie, which is very clearly capitalizing on three things, and those three things being the profit that always comes with low budget horror films. Small budget, you have like about 5 million of a budget, it's going to make about 20 million or something like that. That's what they're banking on. You have the nostalgia, as the Banana Splits, the characters, they were originally a variety TV show from 1968 to 1970. And essentially, I also think, although I can't really confirm it, but given what they're trying to do with it, they might be trying to bank on the success of the Five Nights at Freddy's video game series, which has become very popular and has so many sequels, and I believe there is also going to be a Five Nights at Freddy's film, so they might be trying to beat that film to the punch and maybe capitalize on any possible success or interest that I guess the fandom or the film might generate, for example. But that being said, this film looks really cheesy, and it almost looks like it's going to be so bad it might be good. And I actually do want to see this film. Like, I'm not saying it looks good, I think it looks like absolute trash, and it looks like, low budget schlock, which I don't think anyone is going to remember, because I think this is not even being in cinemas, coming out on DVD. I don't think anyone is going to remember in 3 months' time. But it is interesting, though, because, I mean, a lot of things don't make sense in terms of what they're trying to do. Like, for example, if this is the modern day, did they just reboot the Banana Splits but turn them into robots? Like, what's the rhyme or reason behind that? Why not just get professional child actors or, character actors or animal actors to do that. I mean, the Banana Splits do play music. You'd kind of want someone who can, do all few things. I don't think a robot can play, at least as of right now, being modern day, play a musical instrument that well, or at least pretend if they're just going to play an audio track in the background. And it also kind of struck me as very weird, and it kind of like destroyed the whole premise of the film, because I was really thinking, and I was like, given how children's shows now have like bigger budgets and more freedom to basically create anything, like if you want to make a show about I don't know, talking aardvarks that are human sized that live in a ice world, you can, and that will be doable, and it will probably look great if you put in enough effort into it. And also on the flip side, you have really cheaply made like CGI animated shows that have become massive successes. Just look at shows like Peppa Pig and Paw Patrol. Those shows are made on a very small budget. Those guys can probably make an episode a day, and they still turn a profit in terms of like, toys and marketing and stuff like that, and children just love that. And also you got to consider, YouTube, being a popular option for children. There's tons of videos in which they can watch those cheaply made shows and other such things. And, at the end of the day, I think this is like, this outdated series has a lot of competition. Once again, I'm basing this in modern day, and it wouldn't last long or even stand a chance against anything that's on TV right now, especially soon as most people would say it's a ripoff of this or that, Yo Gabba Gabba or something like that, an inferior version of that. And yeah, it wouldn't last, simply put. And it feels like they didn't think about that. They're kind of just going, oh, it's the Banana Splits, you remember them? But now they're killing people. Oh, isn't that funny? And it's clearly not trying to be smart or scary for the most part. It's just funny in how silly it is, and I get that. That concept can work. But even still, you need skill, and you need context, and you need effort to pull off something like that. And very few people have been able to do that. Successfully. Very few. And, apart from some practical effects on the actual costumes, which I thought looked decent, this looks like a very lazy and cash grabby based film. And I'm not happy, because there could be potential in something like that. I have no idea why Hanna-Barbera or Warner Brothers kind of gave them the rights to do this. Sorry, excuse me, I had to sneeze. I have no idea why they gave them the rights for that. Maybe they just don't care. I don't know. Warner Brothers doesn't really know what it's doing with Hanna-Barbera's properties for the most part. But yeah, we'll see how this film turns out. Maybe it will be a so bad it's good film. Maybe I'm the only person talking about this film. Who knows? But then again, I would like to know what you think about the Banana Splits movie or the Banana Splits horror film. Do you remember the Banana Splits? Do you know what the hell I'm talking about? Are you interested in this film? Are you not? Let me know. raccoonplusfriends@gmail.com. That's my email. You can hit me up with any questions or ideas or suggestions or your opinions on anything. I would love to hear them, simply put. Before we move on to the next trailer, let me get a quick sip of my water, because I feel like I'm in a bad position right now. Oh, that's good. Right. Next trailer. We're going to be talking about Dr. Sleep. Now, obviously, this is going to get quite a buzz, because this is the sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, based on Stephen King's novel of the same name. By far one of Stanley Kubrick's and Stephen King's most successful things ever, regarded as one of the best films of all time, personally one of my favorite films of all time. And the fact that there was even a sequel to, the book and the film really bothered me for the longest time. I mean, you think of everything you know about The Shining, whether you've even seen it, you know of The Shining. It's that ingrained in pop culture and film history that, anyone who has never seen The Shining, once watching The Shining, will know what The Shining is, or know where all these references and that stuff come from. And it's I don't know, I'm at a really tricky position, because the way I see kind of sequels and remakes of like existing properties and stuff like that, I would rather have a forgettable bad sequel than a pointless remake any day. So to some extent, I'm really glad that they've just kind of done a sequel. because, you know, if the sequel's bad, you know, it's not going to destroy or damage anything that the original Stanley Kubrick film did. But for the most part, I'll be fair, I'm actually interested in this film. You know, I thought I was going to hate this just based on the fact that the trailer existed and the fact the film is happening. I mean, I can't really stand the Steven Universe, for example. But I'm more interested to see how much they're going to change from the book in order for this film to be closer to The Shining, and whether or not they're going to combine the book and the film, as in Dr. Sleep's book and a film adaptation, and take elements of what was kind of established in The Shining. Hopefully that made sense, but I'll be interested to see if they're going to compromise in order to be more like Stanley Kubrick's Shining, as opposed to being its own thing or being closer to the book. So I'm interested in that respect. I know a little bit about Dr. Sleep. I've read the Shining novel. I love, obviously, the film. I don't know too much about Dr. Sleep other than the basic gist of it. And I'll be honest, I've never liked the story of Dr. Sleep for the most part. I know some people say it's good, you know, decent follow. You know, I've never liked it. I think the main issue for me has always been like the central threat for the most part. I won't really spoil what they are because the trailer doesn't really, but I find them to be really weak and uninspired and a little too on the nose compared to the first book or the first film. You know, I mean, they're not ambiguous enough because, I mean, you can kind of already tell just from the trailer what they are, and the fact that they're just there as a physical threat that, you know, can easily be killed, can easily be found, you know, just, I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me, and especially given that the film just has like this really poor glowing eyes effect. It's really lame, it's really cheap looking, and I don't really understand the intent of that. I'm not saying they should all be like CGI monsters or anything like that. What I'm saying is what they're going for doesn't work and it's not a threat, and I don't consider them a threat. And that's a problem if this is going to be, you know, I don't want to spoil anything. If this is going to be a threat that's going to put our main character or the town in massive jeopardy. It's a real shame. And the other issue I have with this film is quite a big one, which I don't think a lot of people are kind of addressing or have noticed, and that's that this trailer, and it might just be the trailer, this trailer for this film is relying way too much on flashbacks to the Shining film. And yes, I know what people are going to say. You know, in the first film, in The Shining, you know, Doc had flashbacks. He had premonitions of things that were going to happen, of things that had happened. And it's completely understandable that, you know, how many years later, a few decades later, he would remember those horrible sights in very vague and weird, like, you know, sights. He probably wouldn't remember them quite the same way, you know, given he saw him as a child, he's now an adult. I get that, and they can run with that angle. But these recreated and reshot scenes from this first film will hurt this film, unfortunately. And I'll give you two examples. The first one being that they're essentially creating continuity issues with these scenes, especially the way they looked and the way they were, the way they planned out and the way they were lit. It's not going to be how fans remembered certain things playing out and happening, and obviously people who hadn't seen it aren't going to know what the hell was going on. You know, for the most part, it's not going to work. And the best example I have is the scene of the blood coming out of the elevator, which is one of the most iconic shots from the film. They basically didn't create that shot because they wouldn't be able to do that, you know, exactly. You know, they would have to literally recreate that scene, to which most people, or which I'm not even sure if it's documented how exactly that shot was created, and they wouldn't be able to do it accurately, simply put. So I'm not going to fault them for that. But essentially what you have is you have the trailer using the shot from the original film. So you have this picture quality drop from the first film, which looks like old and odd and outdated compared to the film, and it's super distracting because it just looks like you took a clip from this film, and it looks even more out of context, especially if you haven't seen the original film. And this is why I say it's going to hurt the film. If they rely way too much on being faithful for the second film, if they rely too much on being faithful to the original film, this film will have no identity at the end of the day. It'll just feel like a reference to the first film as opposed to its own beast connected to it. And that's a real shame. And I understand that's probably studio meddling, which is a shame because Warner Brothers just love to mess with people's films and ruin it and then immediately blame the director or the editor and say, oh, it's your fault the film flopped. You know, despite the fact we came at you with all these changes and all these issues that we wanted addressed. But, yeah, I don't know. This film won't be better than the first film. I don't even think this film will be good, but I think it has a lot of potential to be something at least decent. I didn't see a lot of like jump scares, so it might be a slow burner. And I guess I should mention that the director of this film was the guy who directed the Netflix series The Haunting on Hill House. I believe that's what it's called. And a lot of people really like that show, so already people are singing this film's praise as if to say, oh, it's fantastic, it's amazing. We don't know that. This film could be absolute trash, and he might have just got lucky on the first TV series, you know, because he had so much, help and input in that. But, I wouldn't count this as a success. We'll see. I mean, everyone seems to be singing Warner Brothers praise, because they have the Joker film, and they have It Chapter 2, and now this, and people don't seem to realize all of those films could be absolute trash. They could even be like racist and offensive. You don't know that. And it's best, it's fine to be optimistic, but don't be too optimistic because you will end up just being crushed. Okay. Moving on to the last trailer, which is, I guess, one I don't think a lot of people are talking about. And that is going to be Love, Antosha. I believe that's how you say it. Yeah, Love, Antosha. I'll give you the spelling of that real quick. That's Antosha. I believe, yeah, Love, Antosha. I believe that's how it's said. And this is the official trailer for the documentary, basically around Anton Yelchin, who was a actor who unfortunately passed away way too soon, which is a massive shame. And it still upsets me to this day because I think he was such an amazing talent for the very few films he was in. And so this documentary is essentially, from what it seems, although for the most part it is a compilation of just interviews and clips from his life, archival stuff, it definitely seems like it's coming from the heart, it's coming from the right place. It seems like things have definitely been handled with respect and care, although I've read up they are touching on some things that maybe people didn't necessarily know about it. Even then, I've heard they're kind of handled in a very mature and interesting way. They're not trying to go, oh, expose Antoine for the blah 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 he was. No, they're not going to do that. And even if he was, let's say bad things, I'd imagine they're going to address them in a kind way for the most part. And it's interesting. I am really looking forward to learning more about this guy because, like I said, I think we lost him way too soon. I mean, the guy was in the reboot of Star Trek. He was in, I believe he was in The Green Room. He was in quite a few films, which he was not in enough films, personally, but I think one of the best things about this film, just kind of looking at the trailer, which you can see, is it's really sweet and heartfelt that friends and actors he worked with have kind of come together to talk about him and kind of like his life, and kind of reading up on some of the other people they're going to feature that weren't seen in the trailer. You have people interviewed like Chris Pine, Simon Pegg, J.J. Abrams, Jodie Foster, Willem Dafoe, Anya Taylor-Joy. And also, as well, Nicolas Cage will be narrating some of this film, although I read he will be more narrating some of the letters in which he sent to people, mainly his mother, which is where the name Love, Antosha comes from. I believe that might be what his mum is called, or what he might actually be called. I'm not sure. Do not quote me on that. But I'm looking forward to this film, and given that a lot of people have already said it's pretty good, it's definitely up there on one of my top films to watch, hopefully this year. So hopefully we get a release date, if not a very, very early DVD release over here. And that's the last of my trailers I wanted to talk about. Like I said, almost all dark stuff for the most part. And I know what people are going to be saying. Obviously, it's in the title. We got to talk about E3 2019. Now, I am going to be real with you guys. E3 2019 this year was an absolute disappointment, and personally, in my opinion, a disgrace in terms of what a lot of people are showing. The presentation and the lack of anything original or new or interesting being shown, I just thought was absolute trash. That's why there is no E3 special. Not because I couldn't get people, because I'd imagine the E3 special would probably only scratch like 59 minutes. So it's essentially going to be the discussion of this podcast, my thoughts, if you will, on certain games that I was interested in. Jeez, I can't even speak today. I'm that angry about E3. But don't worry, it's not going to be long, because not much was shown at E3. I mean, Sony didn't even show up, which I guess, I don't know if they are just being cowardly, or they have nothing to show, or, you know, they are so pretentious that they're like, we don't even need to show up, we'll just do our own thing. I don't know what it is. Personally, I think it's actually that they don't have anything. The reason being is because if you actually look at the game schedule as of right now, Sony doesn't have any real exclusives. Nintendo, on the other hand, are essentially re-releasing and getting a lot of games on their console. Some are quite old games, but thanks to people like Limited Run Games, who are a great company, which you should definitely check out if you're looking more for arcade-ish, indie niche games. They are putting out a lot of games on the Switch. I think Nintendo basically announced they're going to be getting like 50 new games, well, new to the system on their platform. So obviously, if you never bought them on a PlayStation 4 or Xbox and you have a Switch, you can buy them there. So, but yeah, I don't think Sony has anything to really show in terms of exclusives, and I think they're kind of freaking out because The Last of Us 2 is taking far too long. And obviously, Days Gone, a video game that is basically Last of Us, you know, released a very warm reception, and it was basically meant to be a distraction. You know, I think Sony are more interested in censoring other people's products and games as opposed to actually developing and funding their own games. Sony is being really retarded right now. And yeah, I'm just going to say it. Sony don't know what the hell they're doing, and they're putting all their effort into censoring games for whatever reason, and the PlayStation 5, which will be dropping next year. That is not a confirmation, that is just my guess. PlayStation 5 will drop next year, or at least be announced, because Sony, like everyone else, knows that the PS4 was absolutely lackluster in terms of the games it has, in terms of its graphical power. That's why they had to release a PlayStation 4 Pro, just to keep up. So that's kind of like my rant on Sony, for the most part. Microsoft's press conference was nothing for the most part, nothing special. I guess they had some nice things, like Keanu Reeves show up to promote Cyberpunk 2077, but even now, actually getting some gameplay of that game, it doesn't look like anything I haven't seen before. It just honestly looks like Grand Theft Auto with a cybernetic paint job. It doesn't look anything special, which is a massive shame, because they've been bigging this game up for, what, like 6 years now? And you have nothing to show for it. Like, no groundbreaking anything, really. It's an absolute mess. Ubisoft, they just could not stop talking about Tom Clancy. There's like about 25 Tom Clancy games coming out. I'm not interested in Tom Clancy, so I don't care. They mostly showed off first-person shooters, to which, honestly, you should probably only really show off 3, because as much as people love shooters, I'm not going to deny, I may not like them, but I know plenty of people do, and they do sell. Probably not what you want to be showing when you're trying to show a variety of games to investors and fans and people who are going to buy your product. So that was kind of stupid. Bethesda, I don't care about Bethesda. They didn't really have anything I cared about. Actually, they did, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I didn't see anything else other than Nintendo. Nintendo were decent. Nintendo definitely gave the fans what they wanted, but a lot of it wasn't anything particularly new. But I feel like I've ranted on about E3 as a whole in terms of like the press conferences. Overall, extremely disappointing. And I obviously question, is E3 even worth even happening again. Maybe we should just bring an end to it, because if you're just going to have such a lackluster display of games and nothing to show for it, then, just don't bother. Let's get into the games I want to talk about, because this podcast is getting long, and I'm pretty sure for those of you who don't care about games too much, you probably don't want to hear me get into the specifics of things. So let's go shotgun round with the games I actually cared about, starting with Psychonauts 2. Obviously, I'm looking forward to Psychonauts 2 finally happening. Unfortunately, Double Fine, the people who essentially are making Psychonauts, they essentially got bought out by Microsoft, which is both a good and bad thing, because them being bought out does mean that the game will hopefully come out in some sense. But on the flip side, Microsoft can easily change the game to be worse, or straight up cancel the game. And also Double Fine are essentially going to lose their creative freedom. A good example, because Microsoft just loves buying up studios to make up for the lack of creativity they actually have, because they're just following trends for the most part. For example, Ninja Theory. Is it Ninja Theory or Team Ninja? No, Ninja Theory. For example, they bought up Ninja Theory and they put them straight to work on that creative brand new game about random characters in a battle royale that looks exactly like Overwatch. And I'm like, cool, you bought a studio just to be like everyone else. Well done. But Psychonauts 2 looks, from what we've seen, looks very interesting so far. I love the fact that the first level, or the level they seem to show, takes place in the mind of the main villain of the first game, which is a great way to open your game and essentially to illustrate how big and how creative and, essentially going to show that you're expanding from the first game is great. For those of you who didn't know, essentially Psychonauts is about entering people's minds, in case you didn't know. Next game I want to talk about very quickly is Doom Eternal. This is the sequel to Doom 2016, one of the best first-person shooters to come out this decade. Full stop, no argument. Simply put, you cannot argue with that. Doom Eternal looks great. I love what they are doing with the movement. They're essentially focusing a lot more on the movement and how you move around, and essentially really amplifying that speed within air. And I definitely like a lot of the environment going to space and other worlds, and obviously going to hell. Looks great. I cannot wait to play it someday. Next game I want to talk about is a actually brand new game, and that is going to be Ghostwire Tokyo. Now, we didn't get any gameplay from this trailer. We didn't get any gameplay from this game, but we did get a CGI trailer, kind of, I guess, showcasing what the game might be about. This is coming from Tango Games, who essentially made The Evil Within, and it's good to see that they're actually branching out and doing something new. I'm very interested in this game to see what it's actually about, especially as soon as it might be following more kind of like maybe a supernatural, especially Japanese folklore and like demon vibe. Hopefully we will see more, Japanese inspired like monsters and enemies. And the main character, although he is faceless right now, I did find it quite interesting that he had a bow and arrow. So I'm wondering how that's going to play into the game, because obviously when you think of, let's say, survival horror, you don't necessarily think of my main weapon or my main means of defense is a bow and arrow. So really interested to see what they do with that. Hopefully it's some kind of like enchanting or spell system would be really great. So that's definitely on my radar. I can't wait to see more from this game after the Evil Within 2, which was a very good game. Hopefully they can deliver another one. Next game I want to talk about is No More Heroes 3. For me, this was like the second biggest surprise at E3, because I didn't think there was going to be a No More Heroes 3, but given what they showed off, the trailer they showed off was essentially a mock of what the gameplay is meant to look like, but it looks like this game is going to be absolutely bonkers in terms of main character Travis Touchdown. Travis Scott, that's a fucking rapper, and not a good one at that. Travis Touchdown. He kind of just comes out of the motel looking like a completely different character, kind of puts on a mech, flies to space, and then he's normal Travis Touchdown, and now he's fighting robots and saying how some alien invasion is going on. And it's like, if that's meant to be the first level, which I'm guessing it is, soon as what he says is a reference to the first game, I'm sold. Suda51 can't really do no wrong, in my opinion, for the most part. So I cannot wait to see more. This might be another Nintendo Switch shifter or seller, simply put. Next one and last one I want to talk about, I told you it's going to be short, is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And I'm only really talking about two things, and those two things being the Dragon Quest crossover, being that the main character or the hero from Dragon Quest 11, as well as other, Dragon Quest games, are finally going to be in Smash. Took them long enough. Dragon Quest is one of the biggest RPG franchises and series in Japanese history. It's not as big as it is in the West, but that's their thing pretty much. So I'm really pleased to see him in the game. And obviously the biggest and best reveal was the fact that Banjo and Kazooie are finally going to be in Super Smash Bros. The Rareware classic characters, the games that put Rare on the map. Banjo and Kazooie finally in where they rightfully deserve to be. And the trailer I thought was fantastic. The cinematic trailer when you have Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, and King K. Rool just kind of chilling there, and you get that great fake out with the Duck Hunt duo basically pretending like it is gonna be them, and then obviously that massive letdown, and then Banjo-Kazooie just comes out, and I'm just like, oh man, tear almost came down my eye when I saw that. Oh, finally. I mean, now that they're in the game, we're done. We don't need anybody else in Super Smash Bros. In my opinion. There isn't really anyone else who really needs to be in there. So I'm happy. I'm so happy, and I'm glad other people are happy that they finally, rightfully got into the game. Oh my gosh. Really pleasing, really happy. Now, in terms of how I've done the download link in the description, I'm probably just going to put trailers for the things I talked about. Everything about E3 is too long for me to link. If I was to link you to every single press conference, I'm linking you videos that are going to be like a total of 6 hours. And I don't think anyone, especially if you don't care about video games that much, is going to want to watch that. So I'm just going to talk about the stuff, I'm just going to link the stuff I talked about. So that's what's going to be in the description because, this is my discussion and my podcast as of right now. So there you have it. Now, before we wrap up this podcast, I want to leave you guys with the video of the episode, and that is going to be Sesame Street, the Tiny Desk concert. Now, for some reason, this video is not on YouTube. I don't know why they haven't uploaded it on YouTube, but it's on their website. So I'm linking you the website link. Simply scroll down and you will see the actual concert or video right there. But essentially, Sesame Street is turning 50 this year, and to celebrate their 50th anniversary, they essentially did a mini concert at the Tiny Desk concert. At the Tiny Desk in NPR. I forget what they're called. You'll see it all in the description and that. But definitely, so we have like a nice variety, a nice balance of things for the most part. So hopefully this will be nostalgic in a good way. Hopefully you will get. Hopefully you'll feel something from this, because I thought it was very heartwarming and I really loved it. And that's pretty much going to be it for the podcast. I'll kind of address a few things right now. I know I said on last podcast that we were going to do the best and worst of 2019 so far as a discussion, but obviously I didn't know E3 was going to happen. So that is going to be the discussion of next podcast, followed by maybe 2 other discussions I have planned. So if you guys want to chime in and possibly drop your best and worst of 2019 so far, you can let me know, I guess, in the comment section of this YouTube upload video, or emailing me at raccoonplusfriends@gmail.com. You can also chat to me, although I probably won't chat to you back, on Twitter. That's I completely forget my Twitter. It's because I don't use it. That's why I don't really use my Twitter. I kind of find it to be a bit of a waste of time, and that's at the Angry Raccoon. Only just one C in the raccoon. And there isn't really anything else to say other than hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. I'm sorry if it sounded a bit different. I tried my hardest to make it sound as normal as it does. But, things change, things happen, and you just kind of got to deal with it, and you kind of just got to make the best of a situation that isn't as great. So I guess on that note, I will end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you guys on the next podcast.